Hello, everybody. AJ Locascio here with Umbrella ND, and today we have Addie Ray, who is a certified ADA coordinator. And Addie is here today to talk with us about some of the things with ADA for the 36th anniversary. Addie is well known for saying disability comes with ability. And today she's going to be talking about entrepreneurship, financial freedom, and policy traps that are found within the system. Addie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. And this is very prevalent right now, not only in the world discussion, but in my own personal life right now. So it couldn't be a more timely discussion.
You're not just an expert in the system, you're also a lived experience user of the system. So you know all different sides of it and come with very well-rounded knowledge. And we very much appreciate your time that you dedicate to support other folks in the community so that they can know some of the things that you know.
Okay, what we're looking at right now is the home screen of today's presentation. It says disability comes with ability, entrepreneurship, financial freedom, and policy traps. And my business logo is at the very top in my brand colors of pink and blue. When you're listening to this, some of what you're going to hear may sound like pie in the sky goal, unrealistic, unobtainable, just wishful thinking. That there is only one way to sustain your needed medical care, your access to your wheelchairs, your access to your other medical equipment, and your medications that you cannot live without. No ifs, ands, or buts. And that only way is to maintain your eligibility for Medicaid by staying below an asset limit that will be discussed, and you have no choice. Let me just say that that is not accurate. There are legal precedents in place that do allow you to save and temporarily maintain your Medicaid, and then once you have saved enough, leave Medicaid and other assistance programs of your own free will. People with disabilities are often told, either from birth if we're born with our disabilities, or from the onset of the disability if it comes later in life, that the best we can expect out of life is to be on the system and be reliant on certain things forever. This does not have to be the case. We are building means of economic, educational, societal independence for ourselves within these systems to make a better future not only for ourselves but society at large.
So this first slide, you talk about the ADA creating a floor, not a ceiling. And one of the things that you say here is it was never meant to be the finish line. Can you expand on that a little bit and tell us what you mean by that floor and ceiling?
Okay. Well, the floor really goes into, if you look at the ADA, particularly the architectural standards for the ADA, which in this case would be the 2010 standards, which makes them this year 16 years old. In my opinion, they should have been updated again by now, but that's just, my opinion. But those only go through your basic architectural regulations. That alone does not equal full accessibility. In fact, I'll give you a specific example. Okay, a ramp to get into the door to the door of a business establishment. That is a one-stop example of what I mean when I say the floor, because that gets you to the door. It does not get you physically through the door. It does not give you immediate access to the front counter of a business establishment. It does not give you access to the restrooms, etc. There are plenty of people who unfortunately are under the misconception that if they have a ramp at the front of their business, that they have nothing to worry about. Oh no, that is just the starting point.
Right. It's kind of like having a ramp, but not putting de-icer on it during an ice storm.
Which we thankfully we don't see a lot of those where I live, but we're talking about an entire country here, not just where I live.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second point that you talk about is that this is built because of rather than in spite of. So we are asking people to think about an ability that they have built because of their disability and how their disability actually has helped them be innovative to use this new ability that they have created.
Right. I can. It really goes into something that we'll talk about later on through this presentation and your questions, AJ. My business. I built my business because of my disability and because of the inclusion issues that I faced because of my disability. From the age of 11, I started looking around at my environment, particularly at my schools at the time, and I realized that in order to get what I needed, I was going to have to start advocating for myself because the way it was supposed to go was my teachers were supposed to be given a copy of my individualized education plan, aka IEP, several weeks before school started so that they could be prepared to give me my appropriate accommodations from day one. But the system, in my experience, 99.99% of the time, they did not keep up. My teachers were often not handed my IEP until several weeks after school started. And so I would make it a point by the time I was about 11 years old of going to my teachers the very first day of school and explain to them, okay, you haven't gotten it yet, but it's coming. But in the meantime, I need a desk that I can roll under. I need a note taker. I need potentially what I can get in PDF form instead of printed form, all that. And 9 times out of 10, I had teachers that were receptive. Every now and again, there was actually a teacher that would take insult because they had a certain way of running their classrooms, and they took my need for accommodations as a threat to their authority to run their classrooms. And when that happened, my mother would have to step in and let them know what was what. But it all started with me advocating for myself. And then the business came along several years later when, after having to leave college due to health issues and going through 2 years of searching for your general 9 to 5 part-time job, I was getting nothing, nada, zilch. And so then entrepreneurship was brought to my door.
Awesome. And that actually takes us to point number 3. You built something yourself because the system wasn't really designed with your success in mind. So you have had to design around it. And that's really what you've done with your own business and why you find that it's important to help other people do the same. Do you have any examples of other folks in the community who are building this out themselves and creating successful
Right.
practices?
Tell you some of the major ones that when you look at them, their platforms have grown to the point where their success at what they're doing is unquestionable. No one is going to mistake them for the, shall we say, backyard garage sale type of environment. Okay? And that's not to disparage people that have garage sales. I just mean in the business world, there's a start point and then there's an established point. And the examples that I'm going to talk about are the established points. And one of the big ones is a young woman by the name of Tiffany Wu. She is an amputee. She lost her father and her arm in a car accident, and several years ago she started a platform known as Diversibility. She is a well sought after, highly paid speaker, consultant, and her Diversibility Facebook group has exploded over the years. And so she perfectly represents an example of high-end, successful entrepreneurship with a disability. There is also Colette's Cookies. This was started by a young woman by the name of Colette. I'm having a little trouble with her last name, but if you simply Google Colette's Cookies, you'll be able to find it. She is a young woman with Down syndrome, and she finished basic school and all that sort of thing and went to her state's vocational rehab system just like I did in an attempt to find employment, and she went through several interviews, and every time she got the response of, well, thank you for applying, but we don't think you'd be a good fit, which I can tell you when you're living with a disability, that often sounds like, well, technically you're qualified, but we don't want to have to go through the process of accommodating you. Which, just a little side note here, ask an ADA lawyer, they will tell you that is illegal. Unfortunately, it's extremely hard to prove in a court of law. So after going through that treatment time and time again, Paulette realized she already had a skill that she absolutely loved to use, and that was her skill of baking. And so she has now taken that and turned it into a business where she has ongoing contracts with several stores within her region. She ships all throughout the US and Canada, and she has actually started programs to train other up and coming entrepreneurs with disabilities. She also hires people with disabilities. Last I checked, her brand is now worth over $1 million.
That's awesome. And there are a lot more disabled folks in the community who have done the same thing. Like you said, you can do a quick Google search and find some really great examples of people within our community who have taken their disability and said, I'm not having success in this way, so I'm going to make some changes and I'm going to do some things. So, the next thing that we were talking about is a financial trap. Why does the system keep the floor low?
Okay, this I have to give a little, shall we say, content warning, because there are some people that may find what I'm about to say inflammatory, offensive, etc. But the way I have come to think about this is the reason they keep it so low. Well, there's two reasons. One, Medicaid was never meant to be a long term medical insurance plan. It was meant to be for the elderly and or the terminally ill who only had, if they were on the luckier side of things, a matter of a couple of years to a couple of months left. That's what it was originally created for. That's one of the reasons that the asset limit is so low, because it was not meant initially for long-term usage. As such, it has never been adjusted for things like the rise in the cost of living or inflation since about the year 1965. Okay? And on the other end of that, besides all the logisticals that I just described, there is also this fear that I believe, both personally and professionally, that exists among the very powerful that control these rules. The disability community is currently growing exponentially and is expected to do so over the next couple of decades. And there are those in power who fear that if people with disabilities are allowed to operate at our fullest intellectual and financial gaining potential, we will become a threat to their power. This, to my way of thinking, is purely driven by a unhealthy sense of self-preservation. Because there is one thing that people think with this mindset have forgotten. That no matter what happens in the world, no matter who does what, eventually everyone comes to a point where they're going to pass from this world. And that's not to be morbid, it's just a fact of science. And so to me, when this fear takes over the powerful that leads them to perpetuate these limits, they have forgotten that really and truly fearing losing your current financial status, your current power, it does nothing for you or the rest of society in the long term. Would you rather raise and or eliminate these limits so that society can improve?
Let's move on to this ABLE accounts and special needs trusts. These
Right.
are that are available now. It's not just something that is a justice thing that people deserve, but it's an
Right.
actual tool that we need for the system.
Okay, so ABLE accounts are a special type of account. Works very similar to a bank account for those with disabilities who are diagnosed. It changes every year, often increases. The age that you have to be diagnosed before is now 46. In other words, if you are diagnosed with a disability, permanent disability, before the age of 46, you qualify for an ABLE account. Okay, and the way it works is there's two. I'm not going to go too much into the logistics. If you want to know the full-on logistics of how much you can contribute and all that sort of thing, you can speak to a specific ABLE account specialist. But there is a limit of how much you can have in there over an extended period of time and how much you can put in per year. I will say that per year, the initial cutoff limit is, last I checked, about 18 to 19,000, depending on your state. But then if you do have a job, or your 9-to-5 job, or you are an entrepreneur, there is an extra section called Able to Work, which allows you to save even more. But coming down to it, you cannot have more than $100,000 in there all at once before you have to start spending it down before you can put more in there. I will say, however, and this is why ABLE accounts were instigated in the first place, but the thing of this is, money within that account does not count against that asset limit. In other words, let's say you start saving up in one of those accounts and you've got $50,000 saved up in that ABLE account, and you've got $15,000 in a normal savings account, which is just under the asset limit. The only thing Medicaid can process to decide whether or not you still qualify for Medicaid is that $15,000 you've got in that regular assets account.
Definitely good to know. So as far as policy goes, you're calling for 3 different things. You're calling for asset limit reform, Medicaid buy-in expansion, and the decoupling of healthcare from benefit status. Can you explain each of those policy asks to us to help people know where they might be able to advocate?
Right. Before I do that, there is one other section of assets that I need to go over, and that was what you mentioned before, which is the special needs trust. It is a specific type of trust that can be set up for someone with disabilities, that certain assets that would normally count against you can be put into that account. that they won't count against your Medicaid. Now, you personally, as the beneficiary, cannot put anything in there, but your family members can, your friends can, and you can even use that account for investment purposes. For example, I am currently in the process of seeing to it that the house and the car that I stand to inherit go into that account, so that when I inherit them, there will not be all that probate situation, and Medicaid will not be allowed to count my house and my car against me as assets. And I have recently learned that, say you want to invest in real estate stock, the money that you make from your real estate stock can be routed directly into that special needs trust, so that it does not count against your asset limits, and there is no limit to my knowledge. And of course, like I say, check again with your attorneys. But to my knowledge, there is no limit of how much money can exist within a special needs trust. So now on to those reforms. Which one would you like me to go over first, AJ?
Let's talk about an asset limit reform. Explain to us what you mean by that and how people can get involved.
Okay, so the asset limit basically means that you cannot have more than $2,000 worth of assets in your personal name. This includes things like your house, your car, and your general savings account, which I can guarantee you in today's day and age, no matter what state you live in, if you own more than one house and one car under your legal personal name, it will automatically throw you over that asset limit. I should mention that your main house and your main car, because you must have a place to live and you must have access to transportation, do not automatically count against you. But an extra house, such as a vacation house, an extra car, if that is in your name without the special needs trust protection, you're going to be in trouble. And so the reason why we need asset reform, or better yet, asset limit elimination altogether, is because, once again, it is 2026. Inflation is not what it was when this rule was created in the 1960s, nor is the cost of living. Both inflation and the cost of living has exploded, making this unsustainable, unlivable. And that is why there is currently actually legislation that is going through the process that would be a reform policy that would raise that asset limit to $10,000 instead of $2,000. But honestly, if it was up to yours truly, there would be no such thing as an asset limit. Eligibility for Medicaid would be based on one's diagnoses, not their bank account.
Thank you. So the next thing to talk about is this Medicaid buy-in expansion. What are we talking about here, and what can people do to get involved?
Right. I should say, as a disclaimer before I go into talking about this, that my knowledge in this particular area, as I am not an ADA lawyer or an insurance lawyer, is extremely limited. Okay? But I will explain it as I personally understand it. Medicaid expansion buy-in does not exist where I live in the state of Alabama. However, there are some states, in fact, multiple states, where if you are, especially if you are disabled, and you have more than that $2,000 asset limit, you can keep Medicaid by paying a small premium monthly fee. I've heard of things as low as $50 in order to stay on Medicaid, but have more than the asset limit to your name. The thing with Medicaid buy-ins, and this is going into very recent policy changes now, as in right now, there are things like work requirements that are being implemented in multiple states. And this goes into an entirely different discussion because that whole situation is fraught with issues. However, these requirements don't go into effect as strictly in states that don't have Medicaid expansion buy-in.
The last thing that you talk about on here is decoupling healthcare from benefit status. What does that mean for disabled folks and how can they take action?
Right. So the thing about the way Medicaid is currently run now is, once again, it is based on your income, okay, and not your actual disability and or medical needs. And I was talking about this earlier. It all comes back to $2,000 in asset limits is simply not livable in 2026. But the math simply does not add up. And really and truly, to have these types of limits in this day and age, I've heard it described as cruel. And to be brutally honest, that is what it is. The system, as it is written in such a way that we are required to stay in poverty unless we use things like able accounts and special needs trusts and businesses with certain protections in place to save money. But otherwise, unless we know how those systems work, we cannot save money and maintain Medicaid. That is why these things need to be separated.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next one, you are talking about entrepreneurship because that's a great way that people can create sustainable living. And so self-employment, it's not about hustling. Hustling is dangerous. Hustling is something that is really not a sustainable way of living for anybody, let alone folks who have disabilities. What is the point of being an entrepreneur? Why would somebody want to do the work to become an entrepreneur?
Right. In order to understand why someone would want to go for entrepreneurship instead of the 9 to 5 situation, especially with disability attached, okay, in the 9 to 5 way of doing things, your boss gives you certain hours that you must work. If you have to stay at or under 20 hours a week in order to maintain your insurance, that's pretty common, okay, you'll be a part-timer, okay? But then if you look at things like the minimum wage, according to the federal government, is still $7.25 an hour. And that is contributing to a non-livable income situation for everyone, but especially the disabled community. There are even loopholes that exist that say employers can get a special certificate that allows them to pay their disabled employees under the federal minimum wage. So less than $7.25 an hour. And you may not even be using skills that you are trained for in that job. Me, I am trained as an ADA coordinator. And in the general 9 to 5 system, I cannot get a job as an ADA coordinator at one company that pays me according to my intellect and skills. And so instead, what do? I become an entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, I operate as an independent contractor that does what is called business to business contracts. And right now, I am focusing on retainer proposals, meaning a client pays me monthly for services and they give me a certain amount of work to do within my own flexible hours every month, and they pay me a high premium rate. Well, I can't give very in detailed examples because clients deserve their privacy and protections. I can say that a contract proposal that I am getting ready to send out later today is for $3,000 a month. Okay, now let's think about that. $3,000 a month versus $7.25 an hour. And before you start panicking, what was that you just said, Miss Ray, about asset limits and all of that mess? Aren't you going to be kicked off your Medicaid the minute somebody approves your contract and pays you your first $3,000? No, because the way my business is set up, the money I make through my business does not get counted towards my personal asset limit, except for what I transfer to my personal bank account. But anything in my business account does not count towards my asset limit. Meaning I get 3,000 a month contracts in a year, meaning I make $15,000 a month through my business. That does not count against me.
Excellent. And that takes us to that working model. I think you just kind of covered that one. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that working model before we moved over to the basics that matter?
No, I will say that you mentioned here innovative entrepreneurship program. That is still very much in its conceptual stages, but I am working on a way to have that done completely online so anyone can access it. So just keep your ears perked.
Awesome. Because one of the best ways that we can give back to our community is if we learn something and then we share that with somebody else, and then they can take that information that they learn and they can share it with somebody else. That's really the community working together for sustainable living within our
Right.
community.
And there is one last thing I'd like to mention. All of these systems that I'm mentioning that allow you to save money but keep your benefits until you make enough that you feel comfortable leaving your benefits behind. Let me say that is the goal for me. Eventually, my goal is that I will not only be making positive impact through my business, but have so much income from that I can safely go down to the appropriate offices and tell the appropriate people, you can take me off SSDI now. You can take me off Medicaid now because I make so much that I no longer need it, nor do I anticipate needing it ever again. And let me just say, while once again I am not a lawyer, any lawyer with the proper training will tell you that all these systems that I am using to save this money while temporarily keeping my benefits are perfectly legal. And they were created because powers that be at the time realized exactly what I said, that those asset limits were not conducive to sustainable living.
What would you tell people about how they can ensure that they get access to these programs?
One thing I will say is when looking at, can I really get access to these things? Can I really make a difference? There are going to be days where you're going to ask yourself, well, are using these systems really moral? Because even though they're legal, isn't it kind of like a legal way of basically lying to the government? Those are going to be questions that you ask yourself, and the answer is no. These were what we created because a problem was recognized, but the problem couldn't be just immediately eliminated, which would have been the optimal outcome, but they couldn't immediately go for that. So these were created as an alternative. And secondarily, when you first start out, you are going to find that there are a lot of people that when you bring these things up, they are going to have no idea what you're talking about, and you're going to feel very isolated, very alone. A lot of this stuff was not told to me. I had to figure it out for myself. So find your people, find those resources, and whatever you do not take no as a definitive answer.
I love that message. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about lived experience being a credential. Help people understand what we mean here by a false binary and how things can be true on both sides of an issue.
Right. So there are those that will tell you that lived experience does not equal credibility. Okay? That if you don't have, say, your bachelor's degree or your ADA certification or some other certification that isn't necessarily required by law but nonetheless looks good on paper and to potential clients or employers, if you don't have those things, then your lived experience doesn't count for much. No. Your lived experience means that you understand things that they don't teach in the textbooks at a college. Now, that's not to say that if you want to go to college to further improve on your knowledge that you shouldn't. I am currently in the process of going back to college. I am not against formal education, but what I am saying is your lived experience carries weight, and any certifications you get amplifies that. In fact, I recently found out the research that I was doing that most people, especially in the business to business world, when they're deciding who they're going to hire as an independent contractor, they're not looking to see if you have a 4-year degree. They're looking to see how your knowledge can benefit their business. In my case, my knowledge saves them from, even though I'm not a lawyer, I'm only a consultant, my knowledge still saves them from a lot of liability, legal, and financial hassle.
That's a fantastic point.
So, let's look at the situation of why businesses should hire experts with disabilities, pay them appropriately, and not treat them as simply checking off a box. For my situation specifically, as I just said, I, through my knowledge, save people in money, time, and liability issues. But not only do I save them that money, my knowledge helps them increase their return on investment. So no, I am not a token. I am not meant to check that off the box. No, that's not what this is. I provide value, and so therefore, why shouldn't they hire me? Same goes for you if you happen to be disabled and be a chef. In fact, there was a story on the Today Show about a young man with Down syndrome who is now the chef for a premier high-end restaurant in something like, I think it's New York City. And I guarantee you, they did not hire him just to check off a box. They hired him because they saw his skills, and they have since started a program to help other chefs with Down syndrome and similar conditions get their foot in the door for their careers. We are talking high-end, high-paying, quality stuff.
I love that. And I saw that story. and it's a great one. It's nice to see more and more folks, autistic folks, folks with cerebral palsy, folks with Down syndrome, folks who have had an accident and have a TBI, these kinds of folks who are getting jobs and they're getting to live a life with dignity as they want to
Yes.
do and should be able to do.
But the key thing is here, they're not being put in those high-end opportunities simply because they have Down syndrome and it will look good on that business's marketing. They're being put in those jobs because they have those high-end skills and their employers recognize that they should be paid appropriately for them and or given training so that they can advance their careers.
Absolutely. Oh, we're almost done here. Disability inclusion as a business strategy. You talked a little bit about you actually can save companies money. They get a great return on their investment. So in this slide, why don't you tell people why it's so important to include disability and how it's a good business strategy for them?
Right. This number over here, 1 in 7 people have a disability. That number is projected to grow because people are surviving things like traumatic birth complications, accident, crime, illness, and all those sorts of things that lead to long-term disability at an exponentially higher rate than they were even 50 years ago, thanks to medical technological advancements, meaning they're going to live full lifespans, okay? And through those full lifespans, what are they going to be out there doing? They're going to be out there contributing to the economy, buying and selling. However, if someone with a disability, be it a physical disability or a cognitive disability or a non-apparent disability, cannot access your products and services for your business, what's going to happen? You're losing money. You're losing customers. You're losing employees. And yes, you're losing investors because I'm in the field that I am to make a high-end contribution to society while making high-end income. And so, speaking from my perspective, when I go somewhere to spend my money, decide if I'm going to do business with someone, if I'm going to have a business to business contract with someone to either work for them and or hire them to do something for me, if they're not at least open to the concept of disability inclusion, I'm not going to send that proposal. I'm not going to buy that product. And the thing that is the disability community is becoming so vast that economically speaking, as a society as a whole, we can't survive if disability inclusion within the business sector is not a mainstream discussion.
Absolutely. So, on that one, let's talk about that last bullet point, building a disabled leadership pipeline and not just an entry level hiring. How does that then lead to disabled folks being in a leadership role?
Right. So when looking at your general 9 to 5 employment type of situation, where the person is not an entrepreneur but has skills and ideas to bring to your organization, right now, a lot of times when people with disabilities are hired, they're kept in positions of janitor, mail deliverer, secretary, personal assistant, low paying positions with virtually no chance of promotion, advancement, etc. This is a mistake. A huge, colossal mistake. Because when people are not given the chance to advance, guess what? They have no say in the advancement of the company, which means their idea that could save your company, oh, a couple thousand a month, which could lead to a couple hundreds of thousands to a million a year, that goes unnoticed. It goes out the window. Example, I was in a volunteer position in high school. I volunteered for USA Women's and Children's Hospital all through my high school career. And by the way, my late grandfather started that hospital as a private 100-bed hospital in the 1960s, and it grew into what is today USA Women's and Children's Hospital. And while I was volunteering there in my 4 summers of high school, I noticed they had some serious accessibility issues. And mind you, this was before I graduated high school, before I got any of my credentials. But people who were in wheelchairs couldn't even go into the public visitors' restrooms and close the door behind them with dignity. And so I noticed this over and over again, and finally I got so fed up with the issues that I was seeing that on my last day of volunteering one year, I went to my supervisor and I told her what I was seeing. And I told her, I said, I know it's my last day, but this cannot go on like this. And so she said, okay, I'm going to give you an extra day of volunteering. Come back tomorrow with pen and paper in hand. And so I did. And they gave me access to every area of that hospital except the, highly restricted surgical biohazardous areas. And I went through every floor of that hospital and took notes about every access issue that I saw. It took me 4 pages, which equaled 2 pages front to back. And then, after I presented that to my supervisor, she had me turn it into a PowerPoint. And she gave it to the heads of the hospital. It went into your quintessential filing cabinet for a couple of years, but a couple of years down the road, the hospital came under new administratorship. Okay? And at the time, they were getting ready to do serious renovations. I mean, the scaffolding for the workers was already going up. And the new administrator pulled my PowerPoints and notes out of the dusty old filing cabinet. How she pulled them out, I'm not sure, but they got pulled out. And they started going through them. And yes, it was a woman. And she went through it front end to back end. And then she went to the designer crew without my knowledge. I wasn't told this till many years later. But she went to them and she said, everything you've got design-wise for these renovations, scrap it and rewrite it based on this person's notes. Okay? Now, once again, I said that was a volunteering position. But imagine how much quality that project brought. And from a paid perspective, if somebody was doing that as an employee or a contractor, think about the financial value of that.
That's definitely somebody we would want to have in a leadership position. And that's great that you got that while you were volunteering, but they could have come back and hired you to come in there and consult with that team of designers. And I know this was years ago, but imagine if they would have seen you as a leader to be able to come in and have those conversations with the design team who could have asked you questions and really gotten the opportunity to work with you on site to see how their
Right.
ideas were going to work for community members.
Right. And that is a thought, and that is exactly what you described should be done more regularly. And those types of come in and have those in-depth discussions are built into my services now. So
Excellent. You can see how you built your own company and you started that. I know talking to your teachers happened when you were 11. I bet you had some innovative ideas even before that. So it's very interesting to see how you have grown, and you are a great example to the community of the empowerment that can happen for someone, and having agency in that really does make a difference. All right, let's look at our last slide here. Um,
mm,
So here we're talking about what's available. We'll have links to information on ABLE accounts and special needs trusts.
Right.
We can help people understand those. And then if you could wrap it up with here's what's worth fighting for.
Yes. Um, I I will say that if you ask yourself, you know, what's worth fighting for, I know I've talked in a roundabout way about what my financial goals are. And for me, yes, there is going to be a high end income involved, but for me, the point of that is not the money itself, but what that money makes me capable of doing not only for myself, but for society. I'm going to get extremely personal here. My goal is 7-figure sustainable income. And that is so that, personally speaking, I can get off SSDI, off Medicaid, build an accessible house to my needs, hire living staff to do what I need done for my daily care on a daily basis. But that frees me up to continually run my business, therefore benefiting society with minimal stress. And in doing so, I will be providing high-end income and live in accommodations. In other words, a great quality of life to my employees. And this will allow me to further build on and contribute to existing programs, travel as I see fit, etc., benefiting not only me, but the whole of society. And imagine if this could be done not solely on a one-person scale, but for the disability march.
That's the idea. That's exactly what everybody deserves to work toward.
Yes. And and there is something that I would like to address that I have a feeling a lot of parents will come to you asking, okay, well, let's say someone simply can't intellectually contribute to society. And this is not meant as an insult, okay? But there are people out there whose conditions are so severe that while they may be my age or older, in other words, legally an adult, but their cognitive function is that of a 5-year-old at the most, okay? Which means they cannot necessarily use skills to gain monetarily and or contribute to the runnings of society on a massive scale. These discussions are not meant to leave those individuals out. What will happen if we start implementing systems like have been discussed here on a massive scale is we can put society's resources towards making sure that people in those positions are taken care of in a manner that does not equal modern day institutionalization.
That's awesome. Absolutely 100% agree with that because everybody deserves to live with dignity. Everybody deserves to have systems in place where they can contribute in a way that they are able to do so. The more we are able to support everybody in ways where they can use their abilities, the more we will have in place so that new abilities can be discovered.
Yes.
Anything else you want to add on this?
The only thing I will say is that I know that some people that see this interview, they're going to be probably saying to themselves, well, considering the way systems are now, the goals that Miss Ray has for herself, they're daydream stuff, pie in the sky stuff, as in realistically unobtainable. And to be honest, I think as a society, we have been conditioned to believe as such. We have been conditioned to believe if we have ongoing permanent disabilities and need things like wheelchairs, regular medical care besides your ongoing yearly doctor's appointment, that all those sorts of things, if we need those, then we have no choice but to remain within these unsustainable asset limits and on Medicaid. No, that is not our only choice. That is a system that we have been sold, but we don't have to live like that.
All right, so we have this very last slide. I love this quote that you have on here of the ADA gave us the door. We're here to talk about what's on the other side. Do you have any last comments that you want to make before I stop recording?
I would say that quote sums up my goals exactly, because if we did not have the ADA, and I will say another pivotal piece of legislation, and that is the Olmstead decision, which was a law that was passed in 1990 that said it is an illegal form of segregation to keep someone in an institutionalizational setting that does not strictly need it for medical purposes. If we did not have those laws, there wouldn't be another side.
So thank you very much, ADA, for 36 years of helping us work together to improve a system that really wasn't built for our success, but we're changing that. We're making things different, and we are building the system that works better for us and others like us.
Yes, and AJ, before you hit the don't record button,
You bet.
there is one thing else that I would like to say to elaborate on what I just said about those malls having created the other side. There are those that fear, considering the current political environment and the push that is being made to downplay and or eliminate those laws, that God forbid that day came to pass, that the concept of the other side would disappear and we would go back to the pre-1960 ways of living. Let me just say that both professionally and personally speaking, I don't believe that, because even if, heaven forbid, those laws were to disappear, the concept would not disappear. We've had generations of that. And it's more than just words on paper now, it's a principle.